Hello, Giants fans, and welcome to a new edition of the Valentine's Views podcast here on YouTube. Please like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. It's a Mailbag Friday here at the Valentine's Views podcast. We have an overflowing Big Blue View mailbag this week, so to clear out some of the clutter, to get to more of your excuse me, more of your questions this week. We'll do this edition of the podcast as a mailbag. So let's get right to it with your Giants getting set to face the New Orleans Saints on Sunday. So first question that we're going to look at is from Chesapeake Blue. And Chesapeake wants to know something that a lot of folks have asked me lately, that a lot of folks have commented on social media. Uh, Chesapeake says Giants named Russell Wilson a captain. Now he's not the starting quarterback with Jackson Dart having taken over. Uh, Chesapeake wants to know if Wilson is still important enough to the team, to the locker room, to resist trade offers if and when trade offers get made to GM Joe Shane. And Chesapeake, the answer is no. Russell Wilson is not so important to the New York Giants at this point that they can't trade him. The reality of it is they have other needs. They could use additional draft capital. They could use a serviceable wide receiver to help Jackson Dart at this point. They're not going to get via trade for Russell Wilson. They're not going to get a frontline wide receiver. That's just a pipe dream. But they could get a serviceable one who could add something to their offense, perhaps. There was speculation from Mike Florio of Pro Football Talk that a fifth round pick might be enough to entice Joe Shane to trade Wilson somewhere, perhaps to the Cincinnati Bengals, or that the Bengals might be willing to go that high. I'm not sure if the Bengals or anyone else would go that high, but Wilson, because of the presence of Jameis Winston, Wilson is not so important that the Giants can't trade him. But I do want to say this. There have been, ever since the spring, there's been a lot of talk about Wilson and his leadership and his professionalism and the way that he conducts himself and treats his teammates. And you wonder at times if that's lip service because Wilson was going to be the starting quarterback, and teams had, or the Giants had to, players, coaches had to say things like that about Russ. But the reality of it is, I don't think that's the case. And I just want to give you some examples of some things that I've seen around the Giants the last couple of weeks, and when I've had the opportunity to be there. The day that the decision was made, the day that Russ, the first practice that we saw after the decision to start Dart and bench Wilson was made, that's a Wednesday that I was at the practice facility. You know who the last person off the practice field was? It was Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson after the first practice in which he was the second string quarterback for the first time in his 14-year career, was on the practice field late throwing passes to rookie fourth string tight end Thomas Fidone. I don't know which of the two guys um, had wanted that session, or if they both wanted that session, if Fidone wanted to catch some extra passes, or if Russ wanted to throw some extra passes. But I found that telling about the kind of pro that Russell Wilson is. I've seen some interactions in the last couple of weeks in the locker room with guys going out of their way to talk to Russ, with Russ wandering over in the locker room the other day to talk to Darius Slayton about something that was going on. These guys do have an appreciation, a respect for Russell Wilson. And I need to say this. I think everybody in the locker room can learn something from how Russ is handling this benching, which obviously he can't be happy about. He didn't come to New York to be second string. He's a guy that's won a Super Bowl. He's been to 2 Super Bowls. He's had a lot of accolades. He's made a lot of money. He does not consider himself a backup NFL quarterback, but Russell Wilson is handling this situation outwardly very, very well. And I think that as long as he is in that locker room, that players can learn something about being a pro, about handling adversity from the way that Russ is handling himself. All right, let's get to another question. All right. Let's see. Nick Volpe wants to know if there are any egregious or disappointing things about the Giants through four weeks of the season, which is roughly in a 17 game season. It's the quarter pole. Um, Nick points out, Russell Wilson. He points out Evan Neal, Jalen Hyatt, John Michael Schmitz, Tyler Nubin, the play of Paulson Adebo and Javon Holland in the secondary. And look, I think everybody's disappointed. Russell Wilson didn't bring the Giants the lift that they hoped he would bring them. Look, we said all off season long he's not the player that he used to be, but we thought that he could bring more to the Giants than what they got in quarterback play the last 2 years. He did have one spectacular game, but the Giants decided to move on. I don't think the Giants sold us a bill of goods in what they thought Russ could do. Um, Russ did have the 450-yard passing game. Um, in terms of Evan Neal, Jalen Hyatt, Tyler Nubin, John Michael Schmitz, you always hope for improvement. The Giants moved Evan Neal to guard. They haven't liked what they've seen enough to put him out there. In terms of Jalen Hyatt, it wasn't the Giants hyping up Jalen Hyatt in the offseason and talking about what he was doing in practice. It was guys like me. It was the media watching practice, watching the connection between Hyatt and Russell Wilson, and and wondering about the idea that maybe finally, Jalen Hyatt would show some of the promise that made the Giants draft him. Um, so, again, the Giants aren't selling us a bill of goods on that. It's not coming from the Giants. They're not telling us that Jalen Hyatt is something that he's not. In terms of cornerback Paulson Adebo and safety Javon Holland, the Giants' two biggest free agent acquisitions. I will say this: I think Paulson Adebo has been good. He hasn't been great. Maybe he's not, a Derek Stingley, Sauce Gardner level shutdown corner. Maybe he's not that, but he's a good player. The thing that I think we need to see from a Debo that hasn't shown up yet are the ball skills, the ability to take the ball away, the ability to intercept the ball. That is something, he was really, really good at that. I think he had yeah, I'd have to look it up, but I'm not exactly sure what the number of interceptions was over the last couple of years. I'll try to look that up here as we talk. But he showed a lot of ability to take the ball away while he was with New Orleans the last couple of years. In 2023 and 2024, 22 games, Adebo had 7 interceptions. That hasn't shown up yet with the Giants. Doesn't mean it won't. There's 13 games to play. I think Paulson Adebo is a good player. He's a 26-year-old player. I think he's still a guy who's getting better, guy who still has upside. So I don't think it's time to worry about Paulson Adebo. Javon Holland probably hasn't yet been what the Giants hoped he would be in terms of being a difference-making safety. Again, that doesn't mean he won't be. doesn't mean that they wasted a 3-year, $45 million contract on the guy. It's 4 games. It's 4 games into 3 years. So give it time. Have some patience with it. See how things unfold. I don't think Javon Holland is an all pro level, all pro caliber safety. I do think Javon Holland can be a really good player. And we'll see how it goes. But again, I think it's far too early to to come to the conclusion that signing him was a mistake. Um, I suppose that if I was to pick out one thing that I'm really disappointed by with the Giants so far, it's been their inability with what I see as better talent, deeper talent on the defensive side of the ball, their inability to fix their issues against the run. Uh, the Giants have a fantastic pass rush. They need to put themselves in more and more situations to be able to use it. They can't do that if they can't adequately defend the run. And right now they're giving up 6.1 yards per rushing attempt, which is last in the league. I would say that's the thing more than a single individual or anything like that that probably has disappointed me the most to this point in the season. All right, Robert Cooper wants to know about players who have left the Giants. Says he's baffled why there are a number of players who were average or below average with the Giants, yet seem to thrive or turn into solid contributors for other teams. Robert, I'd like to know who you're talking about here. Um, Saquon Barkley's not an average or below average player. Xavier McKinney's not an average or below average player. Um, Daniel Jones, whatever you think of Daniel Jones had a really, really good season for the Giants in 2022. And to me, he isn't doing anything in Indianapolis in 2025 that he didn't do with the New York Giants in 2022. Are we talking about Evan Ingram, who had some really good seasons for the Giants? We're talking about Leonard Williams, who the Giants knew was a really good player. He's not an average or below average player. Who are we talking about in terms of average or below average players who have gone on to be better players in other places? Look, when you let go of a good player, Julian Love's not an average or below average player either. Well, I think, yeah, as I think of other names, but these guys are all good players. The Giants knew they were good players. There are individual circumstances, as to the fact that each one of those guys is no longer a New York Giant. But I can't think of average or below average players who have become more than that. Ben Bredesen is a starting offensive lineman for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He was a Giant. He's not any different as a player than he was with the Giants. Um, Jason Pinnock. I don't, like I said, I don't really know what players you might be referring to. Are we talking about Darren Waller? Darren Waller was a really good player during the prime of his career who didn't play well for the Giants in 2023, then decided to retire. He had one good game the other night in his debut for Miami. Um, so I don't know. But like I said, Robert, I'm not sure who you're talking about. Um, a lot of these guys, Barkley has done more for the Eagles and had a better year last year than he ever would have had for the Giants. It's just a better circumstance with the best offensive line in the league that puts him in the secondary, 5 yards into the secondary, untouched on a lot of run plays. So the Giants didn't think that Leonard Williams was worth a massive contract at the as he was entering his 30s and showing signs of becoming an injured, of having some injuries for the first time in his career. Julian Love basically turned down the same offer from the Giants that he ended up getting from the Seattle Seahawks. Xavier McKinney, yes, he had a fantastic season last year for the Packers. Xavier McKinney didn't play nearly as well for Wink Martindale as he did in Green Bay. He didn't play nearly as well for Patrick Graham, the defensive coordinator under Joe Judge, as he did in Green Bay. Those are two really good defensive coordinators. Xavier McKinney burned some bridges in New York with his public criticism of the defensive coordinator, which, despite however the Giants felt about Wink Martindale, that is still not something that you tolerate from a player. You don't tolerate a player publicly calling out a coach, publicly taking his feelings about a head coach or about a coordinator to the media. That is not something that goes over well. I hate to say it, but Xavier McKinney lost some trust in the Giants organization with the Cabo situation, where he seriously injured his hand, and lost a bunch of time. I think that was in the 2022 season. So the bottom line is, I'm not sure what players you're talking about. I understand that the Giants have let some really good players go, but I don't see what you're talking about when it comes to average or below average players. All right. We have a question here regarding what happens and who the candidates might be if the Giants were to fire Brian Daboll at some point. And the specific question regards whether or not Lane Kiffin of Ole Miss would be a candidate for the job. And listen, I don't know what's going to happen with Brian Daboll. If the Giants win some games, if Jackson Dart plays really well, uh, then Daboll has a better chance to stay than he would if that doesn't happen. But I look at it, and you see the picture that I popped up on the screen. Lane Kiffin is the Ole Miss coach. Lane Kiffin coached Jackson Dart for the last couple of seasons. So there's a relationship there. There's an understanding there. I think Lane Kiffin, I don't know that he would be given the job. I do think Lane Kiffin um, is likely a candidate if the Giants were to move on from Brian Daboll, simply because of his relationship with Jackson Dart, because of the fact that he does have, even though it's now from 16, 17 years ago, he does have a couple of years of NFL head coaching experience. So I think Kiffin would be on the list of candidates. He would be a guy I would expect the Giants to talk to. Do I know that he would get the job? Do I think he would get the job? That I couldn't tell you, but I do think the Lane Kiffin Jackson Dart connection makes him a guy that the Giants would likely at least consider uh, as a Brian Daboll replacement if and when it comes to that. All right, let's move on to another question. Doug Mullen, the infamous Doug Mullen, wants to know if teams might look at Daniel Jones' success with the Colts and start thinking about building an elite offensive line rather than chase the lottery ticket quarterback. Look, the reality of it is teams always want to build the best offensive line that they can. Um, there's always, there's always a conundrum when it comes down to what you do here. Do you build your team first, or do you go get the quarterback and then build your team around him? Um, and I honestly think that there isn't a right answer. There isn't a wrong answer. There isn't one way that teams prefer. Look, every team would like to have a finished team and then plunk the perfect quarterback into it. Um, I think the reality of it is every team has to have that top tier quarterback. It has to have that quarterback that it believes in. It has to have that quarterback that it thinks it can win with, that it believes can take them to the promised land. And I think that what happens, the Giants were a good example the last couple of years. The Giants in 2024 had an opportunity to draft JJ McCarthy or Bo Nix or Michael Penix. The Giants didn't think that any of those quarterbacks was the right match for Brian Daboll, was the guy that they wanted to put in charge of their program. They didn't think any of those guys was the right fit, the right personality for the New York, New Jersey area. I don't know for sure. But instead of drafting the quarterback, they pushed that decision off for a year and they selected Malik Neighbors, obviously a wide receiver, not an offensive lineman. But what they did was they chose to build the roster. The New Orleans Saints this year, the Giants' opponent on Sunday, were faced with the same type of decision in the draft this spring. They could have drafted Jackson Dart at number 9. They could have easily justified drafting Jackson Dart. Their quarterback, they were entering a season where their quarterback would be fifth round pick Spencer Rattler, who will be the quarterback on Sunday against the Giants. They had a first year coach, an offensive minded head coach in Kellen Moore. On paper, perfect time to draft a quarterback. On paper, Dart looks like a good fit for Kellen Moore, a good fit for Kellen Moore's offense. The Saints chose to push that decision off. They chose to draft Kelvin Banks, an offensive tackle. They chose to build their roster. Every team does it differently. The Saints will probably be in the market for a quarterback in the 2026 draft. Every team looks at it differently, and I think what it comes down to is this: if you need a quarterback, if you love the quarterback, if you're convinced that there's a guy sitting there who can take you where you want to go, who can be your guy for the next decade, you take that guy. Period. End of conversation. If you're not sure, then you don't do that. You move on, you build your roster. You don't take the quarterback because you think maybe or because you think I have to take a quarterback. You take the quarterback when the guy is there who you absolutely 100% believe in is the right guy for you. All right, let's move on to another question. Jim Moriarty asks a question about how the Giants will go forward in terms of replacing Malik Neighbors. And that, of course, is on everybody's mind, Jim. And what Jim really wants to know is whether or not using a fullback would be, or signing a real fullback, not bringing up Elijah Chapman or not using Daniel Bellinger or Chris Manhertz in the backfield. If signing a fullback would be something that would help the Giants. And look, I popped up a picture there of Henry Hynoski, the Hinosaurus, a very popular former New York Giant fullback. Listen, I love the fullback. I'm an advocate of teams carrying a fullback. I loved Hynoski. I liked it when the Giants had Eli Penny, who could not only block, but he could run a little bit. He could catch some passes. I'm an advocate of the fullback. The reality of it is Brian Daboll has shown himself not to be an advocate of the fullback. The and and look, with this Giants team, with Jackson Dart at quarterback, I get it. All right. There's Jackson Dart is a quarterback who played almost exclusively in college out of the shotgun. Okay. Very little, very little time spent under center. He's going to spend almost all of his time with the Giants in the shotgun. You're not going to use a fullback when you're lined up in shotgun. You're just not. Um, if you're going to line up with two backs in the backfield, you're almost always going to do that from under center. You're almost always going to be, in the traditional, NFL formation, with the quarterback under center. I don't see that with Jackson Dart. The Giants will do that on occasion, but it won't be a staple. And the other thing, when I think about using a fullback, when I think about going under center, to me, that takes away one of the elements that makes Jackson Dart a threat. It takes the quarterback run game out of the equation, or it makes it more difficult to to use the designed quarterback run game. It's just it's just not something that I see the Giants doing a whole lot of. I get the idea that the Giants need to think outside the box. I've seen all sorts of questions. Use three tight ends. Use Jalen Hyatt as a slot receiver and move Wandale Robinson to the outside. And I've seen all sorts of suggestions, and I appreciate folks thinking of things that the Giants can do, but believe me, they're thinking about it too. They're trying to come up with the best ways that they can to put their players in position. But simply in terms of a fullback, I'm a big fan of the fullback. I just don't think it fits Brian Daboll's personality. I don't think it fits Jackson Dart's style as a quarterback. All right, one final question. Alan Bachman asks another question about replacing Malik Neighbors as the at wide receiver for the Giants. And listen, when it comes to what Alan really wants to know is he mentions trade candidates, and he talks about two guys from the Atlanta Falcons: tight end Kyle Pitts, wide receiver Drake London. And look, our guy Nick Filato um, did a piece earlier this week on a few trade candidates, on some guys that are on practice squads, and Allen makes reference to the idea of trading Kayvon Thibodeau to get a weapon for Jackson Dart. And look, here's my take on that. First of all, I think anybody who's been listening to this show, anybody who's been reading Big Blue View understands that I am not on the trade Kayvon Thibodeau train. Um, Kayvon Thibodeau right now, for me, is playing the best football of his career. He's still a 24, 25-year-old who's getting better. He's he's growing and growing and becoming a better pass rusher. Um, the combination of Thibodeau, Brian Burns, Abdul Carter, through, along with Dexter Lawrence. That's the best part of the New York Giants football team. I don't know why you would go out of your way to to weaken that. I don't know why you would go out of your way to trade a 24-year-old pass rusher who could be a Pro Bowl player, who is on the verge of having his best NFL season. I don't know why you would do that for what is, in all honesty, at best going to be a second tier wide receiver in the current market. Nobody's giving you T. Higgins. Nobody's giving you a top 10 or top 15 wide receiver in the league. Nobody's giving you Puka Nakua. Um, the it's not going to happen. You're not going to get a Pro Bowl caliber wide receiver at this point in the season. It's just not going to happen. Um, You might be able to trade Russell Wilson and get a useful wide receiver, but you're not going to get a top tier, true number one guy who can do anything approaching the level of what Malik Neighbors can do. Um, I wouldn't be surprised if the Giants are working the phone, maybe to see if they can trade Russell Wilson, maybe to see if they can make a player for player trade involving, somebody like Evan Neal, um, in an effort to get a wide receiver, maybe even somebody like Daniel Bellinger, because they do have Thomas Fidone as an extra tight end. So there are possibilities. There are things they can do. I wouldn't be surprised at all if they're exploring some options, but you're not getting, no matter what you do, you're not getting a number one wide receiver. There's a lot of talk about Chris Olave from the Saints as a possibility, but I don't know if the Saints are going to trade Chris Olave. And I'm not sure I would trade a guy like Kayvon Thibodeau for a guy who really has never been a number one wide receiver in a guy like Olave. He's a two. He's I don't know if it's an apt comparison or not, but is he a younger version of Darius Slayton? I don't know for sure, but you don't trade one of your best players. You don't basically on purpose weaken the best part of your football team when the best you're going to get is probably a second tier player in return. So I'm not a fan of trading Kayvon Thibodeau. Uh, I wouldn't blame. I think Joe Shane would look to trade other smaller pieces to get a useful player, if at all possible. But don't I don't see a Kayvon Thibodeau trade. And a couple more things on the Thibodeau idea. We talked earlier about the number of players that have left the Giants, the number of good players: Saquon, Jones, McKinney, Love, Leonard Williams. Kayvon Thibodeau is the very first player that Joe Sheen drafted. He's turning into a very good player. I don't think Joe Shane is going to go out of his way to move Kayvon Thibodeau off this roster. If anything, I think he's going to find a way to keep him in combination with Brian Burns and Abdul Carter. Those three guys are showing versatility. They're showing willingness on a week to week basis. Shane Bowen is showing that he's becoming more and more comfortable with the idea, or with ways to utilize those three players. So maybe Kayvon Thibodeau decides to go to free agency after the 2026 season. And hopefully before then, the Giants have extended his contract, but I don't think Joe Shane is going to be going out of his way to trade Kayvon Thibodeau anytime soon. All right, Giants fans, I think that's a good spot for us to call it a show. Thank you as always for watching. Remember to check out the Big Blue View mailbag on Saturday morning, and to check out all of our coverage of Giants Saints. And in the mailbag on Saturday, you'll also find this video embedded in there as well. So hopefully you enjoy this video version of the mailbag whenever I get a chance to do it. So again, thank you for watching. Please stay safe out there. Take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye bye.